We don't necessarily need another organization. Maybe we do, right? But we don't need replication of services.
Right.
There needs to be good stewardship. And so jump in and start somewhere.
Yeah.
And if God's still calling you to lead something or start something, those doors will open.
Well, welcome back to another episode of Good Business. Guys, today I'm so excited to have Jenni Lord with Chosen, and I'm going to let her share more about that. But today I specifically want to be honing in on just a purpose-driven leadership, specifically pulling from Jenni's background in leading a nonprofit. And here at Good Business, it's not just about for-profit businesses. We care about running our organizations in a way that is efficient and high-functioning and stewarding what God has given to us well. And so, Jenni, thank you so much for driving into the studio here in Austin. I appreciate the time today.
Absolutely. Great to be with you, Clay, and I'm honored to be a guest. Thanks.
Awesome. Yeah. So, Jenni, would you mind just kind of giving me a little bit of background and what inspired you to start Chosen? And feel free to go as far back as you want. So.
Oh, goodness. Okay. Well, I started the organization about 15 years ago. And for those of you who may not know, we serve children and families who are impacted by trauma. Specifically, our aim is to help children heal from trauma and keep families together. So we work with a lot of foster care children and youth. We work with families who've adopted, grandparents who are raising grandchildren unexpectedly. And I have a personal passion about this space that's been in part of my life for almost 30 years, which I know sounds unbelievable, but actually I was just a young adult entering college, and at 19, my family took a child in from foster care, and his adoption took almost 5 years to complete. And so I saw the inside of a child welfare system that's designed to protect children, how children could actually fall through the cracks, and just how broken the system was. And that really ignited a passion in me to help bring about change.
Wow. Okay, so many questions, because I know the way you so succinctly put it was fantastic, but I know it's a lot more work than just a single minute can explain. So tell me about what that challenge was in getting Chosen going. And I'm sure it was more than one challenge, so feel free to elaborate.
So many challenges. Yeah. I probably didn't answer your first question well, but my passion was birthed 28 years ago for children specifically who have been harmed in their primary relationship, right? And I really couldn't articulate it then, but I learned just a few years later, I'm really a systems thinker. I want to get to the root of problems and help solve them. And in 2006, so just a few years later, my eyes were open to the international crisis. We have an orphan crisis around the world. The church had really woken up in the 2000s. These vulnerable children, orphans, are our responsibility, and was responding to really the move of God to answer the call. So it was a common thing in my community. In 2006, my best friend adopted from Guatemala. I saw the inside of now worldwide orphanhood. And again, just felt this burden of like, I feel like I'm supposed to do something about this. And just, it became a point of prayer for me. I was starting my own family at the time. And so we didn't feel like that path was for us. I was probably pregnant or just had a baby when I had the first, kind of itching again. But fast forward a couple of years, and I had this idea of how to help adoptive families. In our community, people were saying I would adopt if I could, or if we knew where to start, or if we had the money. And so I just had an idea of how to help fund adoptions. Wasn't trying to start an agency, wasn't trying to start a nonprofit, backed into this space like many people, just wanted to do good. And so that idea was actually to start a race to raise dollars to help fund adoptions. And we did that for about 5 years. It was crazy, like built up really quickly. We funded almost 388 adoptions through that, and about 100 orphan care projects around the world for kids who would never be adopted. And then God broke my heart all over again. And you know a little bit about our work, but I really led the organization through a missional evolution to move away from funding adoptions to now start focusing on working with families longer term to help their kids heal from what they had experienced and to make sure that families stay together and weren't falling apart because of the effects of trauma.
Wow. Wow. Well, first off, thank you for what you're doing. I can only imagine just the emotional and spiritual toll of what you guys have gone through. But I personally have benefited because of the work that you guys have done. I have 2 nieces that were adopted through the support that you guys have provided, and couldn't imagine life without them.
Such a special family.
Yeah.
Dream team, one of our first.
Yeah.
It's great.
So as you, from a leadership perspective, as you were going through this process of building out, what were some of the challenges that you were running into, and just how did you overcome them?
Wow, that's a big question. And I think the question depends on the phase of the business,
Yeah.
right? Starting something is one thing, building something and getting to a point of sustainability is another thing. So in the early days, you know, you're wearing every hat, you're doing whatever needs to be done to get something off of the ground, not knowing, you don't know what you don't know, right? And so you're figuring it out as you go. But about probably, again, 5 years into it, I just went to some advisors and said, the current model is not sustainable. And for us to be sustainable, to really have the impact that I think that we could, we need to restructure some things and establish a local board. We were under a national organization at the time. And so I restructured the organization, went and got some additional education specifically around leading in the nonprofit space well. And that was absolutely pivotal. And the other thing that I did at that time, I think that really impacted my leadership journey was I joined a CEO peer group and had camaraderie with a group of CEOs and owners of businesses on a monthly basis. I did that for about 7 years, was absolutely essential to my own personal and professional development, both from a spiritual standpoint, but also just learning the ropes of leading a good business. And there's a misconception out there that a nonprofit is a different kind of business. Good business is good business.
Yeah.
Right? And the only difference between me and you really is on tax day, my status is nonprofit. But to have a good business and have the maximum impact possible requires you to really run a business with excellence. And stewardship, you mentioned early on, is that's one of our core values. And so how we steward the opportunities that God's given us, how we steward the impact and the influence that we have in this space, all of those things we're super cognizant of. And so I've kind of ventured off, but really that CEO peer group was so instrumental in how I think about leading a business well.
Wow. So I have to ask, was that C12?
It was.
Okay,
yeah.
So we have Mike Sharrow on this season.
Oh, great.
And he's I'm sure going to convince me to join a forum. But
I'm sure you're on his hit list.
But one of the things that kind of first brought you guys to my attention is obviously the introduction from Zach. But when I realized that y'all were running your nonprofit on EOS, I was like, okay, all right. I've got to pay attention to what Jenni has to say because she's serious. And not to say that people who aren't running with EOS aren't serious, but when I see that level of intentionality in a nonprofit, that shows that you're on a true mission and you've got a strategy on how to get there. And so that's one of the things that I personally noticed from our very first meeting at Lamppost Coffee was, okay, this is going to happen. This is going to happen because you've got a clear, tangible plan on how to get there, and you're actually executing on that.
Yeah, entrepreneurial operating system.
Yes,
and in fact, that was the counsel to start utilizing EOS came from one of my peers in my CEO group. I was presenting on our core business. It's an 1.5-hour presentation, digging into nuts and bolts. And you're asking your peers for feedback on your 3 biggest challenges. And one of my peers just said, you need to read the book Rocket Fuel. You're a visionary. You need to consider implementing EOS into your business. That was in 2017. So we've been operating that for 6.5 years now. And, the premise is every business reaches a glass ceiling, and to get to the next level, you've got to have a structure, an operating system in place to help you do that. And it has absolutely worked.
I love it.
Yeah.
Well, and that explains how you were able to overcome those challenges because you've got a plan on how to do that.
Right.
That's awesome. So one of the things that most nonprofits struggle with, in fact, I would say all nonprofits struggle with this, you may disagree, I don't know, is fundraising. I mean, fundraising is, it's sales. That's what it is. And most businesses, actually all businesses, struggle with sales. And so that's why one of the most commonly invested in things that businesses choose to invest in is in sales training. And they'll pay a lot of money for that too, because that's the lifeblood of the organization. What have you learned over your years of fundraising? And I mean, you guys, you're a larger organization, a larger nonprofit now that's making a significant impact. What have you learned about that fundraising, and what strategies do you employ that you would encourage other nonprofits to utilize? I know that's a very big question.
It's a big
Solve
question.
all problems for all nonprofits.
So I'm going to I think I'm going to break it down into two kind of buckets of answer. I think the first thing is there is a form of sales, but that the best salespeople, it's all about relationships. And good business is about relationships. And that's with our clients, that's with all of our stakeholders, and that's certainly building deep relationships with those that fund our work, whether that's a foundation or that's an individual donor. And so, the other thing is stewarding the opportunity that's in front of you. If I sit down with you and your passion is the homeless population, I'm going to help steward the opportunity for you to ignite that generosity that is tucked away in your heart with an organization whose mission is in alignment with your passion, right? And so I think for me, it's recognizing what has been very helpful in reducing some of the intimidation around fundraising conversations is it's an opportunity to unleash kingdom impact through the relationship and align hearts. And so if I know that somebody is passionate about kids who have spent time in foster care, children who have been trafficked because of their time in foster care, we have an instant heart connection on what lights us up and what we want to see change in the world. And then it's just about connecting the dots of, well, these are ways that you can actively give to make an impact with our organization. So I think taking that relational approach is super important, and knowing what's of passion to the individual in front of you. And even I would say that with foundations, with businesses, businesses also have their own priorities. If it's not a match, it's not a match. And we should utilize our time well, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So on the relationship front, I couldn't agree more. And finding that shared vision, that shared value for the mission that you're called to is so key. And even in the marketing space, which is where I'm in the video production space, I don't really work with folks that don't share my values, and typically they don't want to work with me if I don't share theirs.
Right.
So, and when it comes to even hiring people in an organization, there's got to be that missional alignment. It's not just a transaction. It's so much more than that. And so I appreciate that highlight. Was there anything else you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, I'll say too. It's the stories.
Yeah.
Right. Stories are what move people.
Yeah.
And when I'm able to share a story about a teenager who's been in 5 homes in 2 years, whose life has radically changed from her own mouth because of the work that our team has been able to do with her, that lights me up too.
Yeah.
And it's sharing the impact together. So it is about storytelling for sure. The second thing because I said 2 buckets, my other bucket is just learning to diversify your revenue streams.
Yeah.
You can't be dependent on one source. We can't be dependent on fundraising alone to build a strong, sustainable, financially resilient organization. So we've been very intentional to diversify those revenue streams and not just depend on fundraising.
So that's one thing. I'm so glad you mentioned that, because most nonprofits, they don't do that. They think, hey, our number one priority is let's just fundraise so we can go do this mission. But I love y'all's approach of finding ways to monetize the knowledge that you have. I mean, there's so many government programs that need support that your skilled and experienced team can bring. And obviously there's plenty of money on the government front.
And not just government, but collaborative partnerships and contracting opportunities as well. So,
yeah, I love that. So could you highlight maybe some specific examples of how you guys do that?
Sure. So as an example, we're not a child placing agency, which means if you wanted to become a licensed foster parent, we don't license foster parents. That's not our space. Our space is really about helping families to keep going. It's equipping them with the tools and resources that they need to help their children heal and to stay together. Because so often we see these kids bounce from home to home because parents or caregivers don't feel adequately equipped to meet the needs of their child that stem from the trauma that they've experienced. So that's an example of where we would partner with an agency that does licensing, and then we're helping come alongside them with their families specifically to help their families keep going. And we have some large relationships across the country with agencies like that who contract with us specifically because we're helping their outcomes. We're helping retain their foster families to help them keep going, right? And it's better outcomes for the kids because they're moving less.
That's powerful. Okay, so kind of shifting gears, we've already spoken a little bit about mission, and when you're hiring, when you're fundraising, you want to have that missional alignment. How do you maintain that mission, especially with your team? And you guys have pivoted missions over the years too. So especially when you're rallying people to a new cause, to a new trajectory, how do you do that?
Well, that's a great question. And I think there's really two questions within that. The first, when we went through a missional evolution, it was really important to repeat. Chief reminding officer, right? Both for the staff, but also for the stakeholders in the community who have come around and they've supported you in the past. Why are you doing this now? It's again goes back to that story, telling them the story of, well, we learned that no one was walking with these families long term, and that the wheels were coming off after the journey begins with a new child in their home. How devastating that now that the party day is over, who's really with these families in the trenches. So keeping that story in front of them and keeping the vision in front of them. For us, we're a decentralized team where we operate virtually, have for 7 years across the country. And we've had to be, even before the pandemic, we had to be really intentional about building a virtual culture and having those touch points on a consistent weekly, monthly, quarterly basis. Some of that's in person, some of that is virtual, but making sure that we're keeping the mission true. We do Wednesday Why, and reminding people, this is why I'm here. This is why this little girl that I mentioned before that's 14 years old, who's been in 5 homes in 2 years, she reminds me of my why, because she's worth it. Her life has meaning and value, and we want her to know that, because that is not the message that she's been getting when she's in the system. So, I mean, we never run out of stories to keep the missional why in alignment. And part of that, this as a good leader, it can't just come from me. So it's important that there's alignment with my leadership team, that they're all modeling that with their own teams. But I heard this one time, I've never forgotten it. Your core values and culture are working when within the ranks, people are recognizing it. So when our frontline staff are recognizing their peers for the good work and representation of the core values, it's working. And so we've been very intentional to spread that throughout the organization.
Wow, I love that. And when it comes to that missional alignment, I've seen as well, if you're not talking about the problem that you as an organization are solving, people are going to stop paying attention. And this kind of goes back to storytelling. A good story has a mountain to overcome. If it's just smooth sailing, no one's going to pay attention. Right. But if there's a problem that you as an organization, as a team, are committed to helping your customer or your donor or the person you're serving, helping them overcome, will just never, ever stop talking about it. And they will all stay rallied to that. So I love that y'all are doing that and doing it so well. So with that said, one of the things you mentioned stories and recording videos and things along those lines. I'm sure you guys do that. But how do you measure the impact that you're making? It's kind of hard to measure from outside perspective looking in. How could you measure heart change? How can you measure the way a parent feels after being coached or supported? I mean, what does that look like in your organization?
I love this question.
Okay.
So we are a very data heavy organization. Yeah. We use Salesforce in the background, and the question, we really have a discipleship model. Mm-hmm. It's empowering families to get on a path of healing. And this question came up when we evolved into this mission 7-8 years ago. The funder who was funding the initial pilot said, how are you going to measure the change? Well, how do you measure discipleship? How do you measure that heart change? We had to figure it out because what we were doing was different than anything we could find out there. And there wasn't something we could replicate. So we had to learn what clinical assessments could actually measure trauma symptoms change, meaning like we can clinically measure depression, anxiety, anger, PTSD in children when they come to us versus when, 6 months after the program has started. We can measure parental stress levels, and there are clinical parental stress levels. Whoa. It's shocking, right? You would be surprised. But most families that come to us are in that clinical range, and we measure that change over time. The most important factor for us is families staying together. You may not know this, but even for foster families, 50 to 60% of those families quit within the first year, meaning those children are moving somewhere else, and up to 25% of adoptions fail.
Wow. I didn't
where
know
kids
that.
are moving to a different home or moving to a residential center. And so our goal is that a child never moves unnecessarily. We never want that to be a parent or caregiver's decision because it causes more trauma to a child. So number one thing is our team has done an incredible job. 99% of our families over the last 8 years have stayed together.
Wow.
So that's the number one thing that we're measuring. And then we measure all those clinical things that I also measured. That's on the clinical and programs front. Just like you, we have KPIs across the business. Everybody in the organization has a number so that we can measure, are we really making an impact? And are we consistently improving how, as we know more, as we know better, we do better, right? And so we have lots of dashboards to track all of those things.
I love that. And as an EOS company, I'm sure that's your scorecard, right? You're tracking that on a weekly basis. So obviously this is a global problem, international problem. You are working internationally, right? Or
not anymore.
Not
no.
anymore. That's right. So on a national level, you're making this impact. And I'm sure that there are hundreds, if not thousands, of other people and other organizations trying to help bring an end to these problems as well. And we're also raising up another generation of people to start organizations, to join organizations like Chosen. What advice would you give to them, to the folks that feel this calling on their lives to bring an end to just a repeated broken system that's just an endless cycle of children being traumatized? What would you encourage to those people as they're being raised up?
For those who wanted to start an organization or get into the game.
Start an organization, make an impact.
Yeah, for me, I like to share. You never know what's on the other side of an obedient yes. And my core conviction when I started the organization was I felt like God was calling me into this, and I did not know how I was going to do it. I didn't know how to do what I felt like he had given me a vision to do, but my answer was yes. And you don't know what's on the other side of that. So I think the conviction of a call and also just understanding what it is that lights you up. If you feel called to get in the space, that could be from a volunteer standpoint. That could be from a giving standpoint. That could be joining a board of directors to make an impact because you have a certain skill set that every nonprofit, needs, right? And so understanding where to get involved. But I think one of the key things I would tell anybody, I got to mentor some young master degree college students who wanted to get into, the nonprofit sector. And I said, you really have to surround yourself with wise counsel. In the counsel of many is safety. And so you have to learn the landscape. The landscape that I work in is extremely complex. There's a continuum of care that involves a lot of different players. And we don't necessarily need another organization. Maybe we do, right? But we don't need replication of services.
Right.
There needs to be good stewardship. And so jump in and start somewhere.
Yeah.
And if God's still calling you to lead something or start something, those doors will open.
I love that. And really just for anyone thinking about starting a nonprofit, maybe not addressing this specific mission, I think that same advice rings true.
Yeah.
If I can kind of branch off a little bit, we have over the past 100 years added numerous dozens, probably hundreds of new denominations to the Christian faith.
Wow.
And so that's a split emphasis, split focus. That's not what we're called to. We're called to be unified.
Right.
And not saying that one organization is better than the other, but I couldn't agree more that there are a lot of great organizations, Chosen being one of them, that are making an impact and just need more people. And I couldn't agree more that we don't necessarily just need to start another organization. Yeah. So when it comes to leading within a nonprofit, you've already mentioned things like a peer group, utilizing tools like EOS. Is there anything else that you would encourage a nonprofit leader to utilize, tool-wise, strategy-wise, that you found to be really successful in your organization?
Great question. If you're not able to join a CEO peer group, I would strongly encourage community with other nonprofit leaders. There are multiple groups and nationally, regionally, locally, where you can connect with like-minded people. It shouldn't be lonely at the top, but the challenges at the top are unique when you're leading a group of people, and you need peers around you who face similar challenges, understanding trends, people who have answers to questions that you don't. As we've built and had to learn more about certain aspects of governance, or as we are facing challenges around data and in implementing new systems, I've learned so much of that from my peers who are also leading nonprofits, right? So you need that community. That's one thing. The second thing is, we'll come back to that.
That sounds good.
I lost it. It was really good, Clay.
We'll come right back to that
All right.
for sure. Don't worry. So when it comes to just this ongoing mission, obviously, you and I were very aligned, I think, in regard to passions. As you know, we've got a grant program for specifically minors who have experienced trauma, and so when it comes to that issue as a whole, I'd love to kind of delve into that if we can. I know my audience, if they're still tuning in after so many times of me talking about things like human trafficking, domestic abuse, things along those lines, we've got to bring an end to it. We've got to bring exposure to it. But could you kind of highlight the problem for us a little bit from your perspective? I know you spoke briefly to broken foster system, things along those lines. But is there anything else that you feel like would be helpful for someone to just be aware of what's going on and why there needs to be a change?
I'm going to take this in two parts also.
Go for it.
So our vision is that which is really about systemic transformation. I started today talking about, I really learned I'm a system thinker. I want to get to the root of something and solve it. The problems that persist in the child welfare system, I saw 25 years ago. The same themes, I see it in cases today. And so And it's not the government's, this is not the government's to solve. We need the government. We need to be in partnership with the government as a faith-based community, as a nonprofit community. But this is not just a government problem to solve. We want to see that systemic transformation to really have a paradigm shift to move into a child and family well-being system. Our focus in our work is relational connection, because connection is actually what heals trauma. It's actually what helps us find resilience in our own life. It's what allows us to overcome obstacles is relational connection. And so we prioritize that because we can actually see in even brain scans of children who have been impacted by abuse and neglect, their brains can heal from that trauma because of attachment to a safe, loving caregiver. But our system focuses on child welfare. It focuses on physical safety. This is historical, and children need to be safe, right? They need to be physically safe. But we can't stop there. We have to look at the well-being of not just the child, but the family. God designed children in a system. It's his first institution in the garden. The first thing he established was the family. And so we've done a terrible job of prioritizing this child and family well-being, making sure that they don't have just physical safety, but psychological safety. And there has to be an emphasis on healing the family in this country. If you can trace almost every societal woe back to the breakdown of family. So I would say from a high level, that's what needs to shift. And when you look at a system that's broken, there has to be a paradigm shift to prioritize relationship and the family. That's one thing. You know, I know you're passionate specifically about child sex trafficking. My husband and I just saw Sound of Freedom. You know, it's just a wretched, wicked issue. Specifically where it intersects with our sector is we now know that about 60% of kids who are trafficked in our country have spent time in the foster care system. That 14-year-old girl that I mentioned before, she was sleeping in a hotel because there was not a family for her to go to. The government's solution, a temporary solution, is a hotel till we can get her into a place that will take her. And she has a history of issues that stem from that trauma. Multiple psychiatric hospital stays. And so when we first started working with her, first day, she ran away from the hotel the second day. Oftentimes, those youth who are most at risk for aging out of foster care are the ones there are vultures, predators on the street corner who are offering them something of safety, of comfort, whatever it may be, a way out. And that is how they get lured into the trafficking world. And so this is something that our entire country should be in uproar about. One of the largest issues in our system of care today is this population who has night-to-night placement in temporary housing. Those are the youth who are being trafficked, who are there. It's a pipeline to trafficking. And I was talking with one of my colleagues recently. She said, she leads a national organization. She said, I don't understand why the whole country is not in uproar about this issue, because it's an issue in every state that we work in.
Every single one.
And it is the equivalent of POWs, where these youth literally don't know where they're going to sleep the next day. And that has that type of traumatic impact on their brain development. So you got me lit up a little bit talking about this.
Yeah,
but
I love this.
This has to end.
Yeah, we've got to bring it into it. I couldn't agree more on the relationship component of that being the solution. I was on the phone with a nonprofit leader who specifically ministers to the girls that are actively being solicited and what have you, just in the heart of Houston. And she was saying that the number one way girls and minors are able to leave trafficking is of their own volition. It's not a sting operation by HPD. It's not the government assistance. It's them saying, I can't do this anymore. The second way that these minors are able to leave is by having someone on the outside advocating for them, feeling like there's someone that will protect them, that they can go to, a relationship. And there's a lot of organizations that are doing it right. There are a lot that are not doing it right. where they're parading people from churches in nice parts of town through the not nice parts of town and helping them feel good about themselves for about 5 minutes, almost going like on an overseas missions trip inside of the inner city. And that's not relationship. That's not fixing that problem. Right. And so when it comes to how we as a country can bring an end to it, it's us putting these down and building relationships with people outside of our comfort zone and being intentional about that and not giving up on them. And I think the struggle is, and you can probably speak to this, people don't know where to get started. People don't know how to engage. But it seems like you're training people on how to engage with these children who have experienced trauma, assimilating into a family.
Right.
Which is why I think what y'all are doing is probably the most important thing in this entire fight. So would you say that there's any tool or guidance that is available for people who are looking to be equipped, to be trained? Any, I don't know, video course or anything along those lines that you could speak to?
Yeah. There's a couple of things. One, there are organizations out there doing great work in this space. Yeah. And so if this is something that's a personal passion for you, I really encourage you to find one of those organizations to support the good work. Yeah. The reality is there is a shortage of good work happening in this space because it's so risky, it's so messy, it's very hard. This population tends to be very transient. But I'm going to tell a little bit more of the story I've been talking about before I answer your question specifically about training. The young lady that I've been talking about, the 14-year-old, her name is Lacey, and I love her story so much because we were able to follow her from the hotel to a residential center and build a relationship with her over the course of 6 months. And she shared a letter with her team member that had been working with her on a weekly basis, and she said, I'm so glad that you helped me get off a tightrope. I think that without you, I would either be dead or in jail. She's 14 years old. Wow. And so we know that statistically, these youth will likely age out without a family. So we want to create relational permanency so that we're offering an alternative to something that actually feels good, isn't just providing that, lure down the street, right? And so find somebody like our work, what we're doing and building relationships with these youth to help keep them off the streets. That's the first thing. The second thing is we do have some training there. We're not the only ones, but we do have some training specifically to equip parents who've dealt with these types of issues, other agencies, direct care staff, and so forth. We're so passionate about it because, unfortunately, being sexually trafficked or human trafficked often leads to sexual acting out with these youth. And that becomes another snowball of problems for that youth that can follow them for the rest of their lives. And unfortunately, there's just not a lot of adequate resources out there to equip people with how to navigate such difficult terrain. So we've developed something specifically called Displacing Shame that is to help equip families, caregivers, agencies, direct care workers with the tools that they need to help kids who are struggling with sexualized behaviors.
Well, that's the kind of stuff that needs to be just promoted and everywhere so that people can easily access it. And thank you for sharing about all that. I know it's a heavy topic, y'all. This is no surprise to you guys, a big passion for Emily and I both. And so I would just encourage you, take what you've heard, go check out chosen.care, which is Jenni's website.
We're not The Chosen.
Not The Chosen. No TV show.
I shared the name. Happy to do it. Yeah.
Great TV show though. But yeah, chosen.care and see what they're doing. It is a huge impact. And if you want to access any of that training, it's there on their website as well. So Jenni, how can people engage with you outside of that? And what would you encourage them to do?
Well, our website's chosen.care. I'm super active on LinkedIn. Jenni Lord. I'm not the only one, but my name is unique, and so you can find me on Instagram or LinkedIn as well.
I love it. Well, the time always flies by on this, and I've already gotten signals from our producer. So, unfortunately, I think we're going to have to wrap up. But Jenni, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show today.
I appreciate the conversation.
Sharing what you guys are doing. And I hope the nonprofit leaders, even for-profit leaders, were encouraged today. And looking forward to seeing the fruit of all of this, of what y'all are doing. And then everyone tuning in, thank you guys so much for being a part of the Good Business community. And I wish you all the best as y'all are aiming to employ everything that we've talked about today in your own business. Check out C12. That's the group that Jenni mentioned. EOS. Go pick up the book Traction by Gino Wickman. And I don't think you mentioned any other tools, but if you did, I'll make sure they're in the description. Guys, thank you very, very much. If you can, give us a subscribe. If you have any feedback for the show, give us a review on Apple Podcasts. And we look forward to seeing you guys in the comments. And feel free to reach out to my marketing agency, Good Agency, at www.goodagency.com. And we'd be happy to chat with you guys. And we'll see y'all next week.